Well, believe it or not, it is March 1st to be exact today, and I cannot even believe how fast this year is going by. It's insane. It is March. Can you believe it? Every week too, it comes a point where I explain what I've got planned to go on. Well, this is take number 2 for this video. I went through about 15-20 minutes worth. Got done, everything went well, and I ended up hadn't turned my mic on. So it was dead silence, just saw my mouth moving. So here we go again. This is a smile, right? It's a fake smile. You'll never see a faker smile in your life because I'm so mad at myself I could scream. But here we go again. Take number 2. Moving right along. This week we had a couple of good supporters here that stepped up to and really appreciate you. And one asked to be anonymous. And I'm going to respect your wishes. You're going to be anonymous, but I'm going to show you. I got your card, and I want you to know I got your card. And I hate not giving praise and credit to folks, but I'll certainly understand and respect anybody wanting to be anonymous. So thank you so much. Also, I want to give a shout out to Heather Lovasz. Heather Lovasz. I hate mispronouncing somebody's name. Heather, I am so sorry. It is Heather, Lovaszz. And Heather is made a generous donation also, and she is moving from Arizona to Wheeling, West Virginia. And I cannot wait to get to Wheeling. I've read so much stuff about history there, the culture, and also even the mafia history. So I'm anxious to get up there. So I'm hoping that your move goes well, and I hope to check that out this year at some point too, because I love what I've read about Wheeling. It's been so long since I've been there. Thanks to Heather, thanks to Anonymous, and thanks to all our patrons for making this possible. This episode is brought to you by all these folks. And every week it seems like I've got a new something that happens to me. I think that I've had so many calamities. I'm like, there's the old name Calamity Jane. Well, I'm Calamity Shane because I just went through my mic being turned off. And also, I scratched my eye with my contact this morning. So I thought, well, okay, I'll just wear my glasses, no big whoop. Well, my new glasses that I wear, I can't find them anywhere. They're lost. Somewhere in this old pair. And I got rid of them about 5 or 6 years ago because one of my relatives jokingly said I looked a lot like Roger Keith Coleman. And if you've heard that name, you know what I'm talking about. This is a despicable, most awful human to come out of Southwest Virginia. He was convicted of murder in Grundy. And not a flattering comparison. So as soon as he said that, I got new glasses. Matter of fact, I can't even stand it. I have to see my own reflection, and I can't stand it. So I'm just going to go flying blind here. So I hate air quotes, but I do them a lot for somebody that hates them. Let's get into history. What do you say? Since you've waited this long patiently. We'll start with March 1st, and that was a man named Bob Thomas was born in Appalachia, Virginia in 1954, and it does not get any more Appalachian than being born in Appalachia, does it? He is an actor and a writer, and he actually wrote a couple episodes of an old series that was on the Disney Channel called Lizzie McGuire, and he was also the voice of Slammin' Sammy in the movie Friday Night Lights. So always cool to hear somebody, a real legitimate Appalachian, doing something in the film or music industry, and will be another 1 or 2 of those coming up. Speaking of which, March 2nd is the birth date of Luke Combs. And Luke Combs was born outside of Appalachia, but he lived most of his formative years in Asheville, and he graduated from A.C. Reynolds High School down there, and he attended Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina. He actually started as a bouncer in a bar there, and then he ended up playing music at the same bar he was once a bouncer at, so that's pretty cool. And he's, of course, went on to a string of hits. When It Rains, It Pours. He had Beautiful, Crazy. And he was also inducted into the Grand Ole Opry in June of 2019. And he has also stepped on the landmine here lately by disavowing the Confederate flag that he appeared with in a video a few years back. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I'm not a political guy at all, as I go to great lengths to tell you. But I'm anxious to see how this plays out for him because, as you know, the Confederate flag is such a hot button issue right now. It's a very divisive thing in the South. You were talking about country music people and NASCAR people, and the Confederate flag. It's just it's a potential landmine that could just blow you to smithereens if you're not careful. And I'm anxious to see how this happens. If it affects his career at all, this will be a really good litmus test for how people perceive that kind of thing this day. I'm anxious to see myself, actually. So he Again, he disavowed appearing in a video with it. And I've seen comments and things, of course, supporting and also against it. And I'm wondering if that impact him at all. Not nearly to the level of the Morgan Wallen blowback, obviously, but be interesting to see if there's any impact on him at all out of that. I'd be curious to see how much the world has changed. I know the world in the South, I should say. If you can say it that way, that's contradictory. But also on March 2nd in 1921, one of my favorite stories that I learned fairly recently was in Welch, West Virginia. There was a city council had a meeting, and they were voting to impeach the mayor at the time, J.H. Witt. Well, Witt got word or wind of this meeting, and he showed up and caused a big disruption. So the city council voted to have him investigated, and they put the McDowell County Sheriff's Department in charge of investigating him. So in the middle of all this, Witt kills the guy that come to investigate him. It was a guy by the name of, I do believe, if I can read my own writing because I am blind, because I took my glasses off, we didn't do that. A man by the name of William Johnson Tabor. He was assigned to investigate J.H. Witt, and Witt killed him, had him offed. And so Witt was arrested and tried for his murder, and he ended up getting acquitted. A lot of people speculate that was because of some perjured testimony. There's a lot of controversy about that, of course, as you can imagine. And he ended up skipping town. And September 27th of 1921, J.H. Witt, as far as Welch was concerned, he dropped off the face of the earth and just disappeared and got out of town, literally. And an interesting thing about 1921 is it's also the year that Smiling Sid Hatfield, the sheriff of Matewan, was assassinated on the steps of the McDowell County Courthouse there also. Him and Ed Chambers, they were going to trial, and they were murdered. They were jumped. And if you haven't seen my Welch video, I posted it probably close to a month ago, maybe longer than that, maybe a couple months. And I go to the spot on the steps where Smiling Sid Hatfield was gunned down. So it's interesting. Welch is just an amazing town full of history. If you've never been, boy, put that on your checkout list, because there is so much history there. I can't even touch on it. I did almost 30-minute video, I believe, on it, and still barely scratched the surface. That's just telling you a little bit about what Welch is about. Moving on to March 3rd. Doc Watson was born in 1923. He was born in Deep Gap, North Carolina. And Doc Watson is a guitarist, songwriter, singer, and he's known for bluegrass, country, folk, gospel, blues. Just a really, really legendary performer, and is still very much revered today. And he performed a lot. He was actually blind as a young child, and he performed a lot with his son, Merle. And I was interested to find out that Merle, I don't know why, I just assumed he was probably named after Merle Haggard. Despite the fact that there probably wasn't all that much age difference. But he was named after Merle Travis, the singer of 16 Tons, the original singer of 16 Tons. Of course, most people remember the Tennessee Ernie Ford version. But Merle Travis sang that, and I do believe wrote it, as well as Dark as a Dungeon, another one of my favorite songs. I love it. If you haven't heard that, go check it out. It's dark as a dungeon, way down in the mines. He had a bunch of mine-related songs. Of course, Merle Travis did, and one of my favorite old school singers. He was just a cool guy. There's a few videos on YouTube about him singing those songs, and he just seemed like the very type of guy from around these parts. But I'm getting way off topic here. Merle Watson, named after Merle Travis, passed away in 1985. He was in a farming accident where the tractor he was on rolled over a hill and pinned him down and ended up killing him. So in his honor, his father, Doc, created a festival called Merle Fest, and it blossomed and bloomed, and it is one of the biggest music festivals in the United States at this point, and it's usually has attendance in excess of 75,000, of course, pre-COVID, 75,000 people who attend this thing, and it draws huge acts and performers and goes on all weekend. It's actually held the last weekend of every April, and it's a huge deal, and it continues to grow despite the fact that Doc Watson passed away himself in 2012, but its legacy obviously lives on in his music and in the Merle Fest. And he's really a guy that influences a lot of the Americana singers and performers, and he had a big influence on them because he had that type of a background. Moving on to March 4th. Nancy Green, and that name may not jump out at you, it certainly didn't to me. She was born in Somerset Creek, Kentucky, and she was a slave, a nanny, a cook, an activist, and what you'll remember her for, she was the very first model to appear as Aunt Jemima. So she was, let's say, she wasn't the actual creator of that recipe, of course. They hired her to model as a character. She was, she lived with a family called the Walkers, and she was freed during the Civil War, of course, and they moved to Chicago, and she moved with them. She ended up still working for the family. And one of the relatives, Judge Walker, actually pitched her to the company that ended up hiring her to become Aunt Jemima. So at the age of 59, she became famous for being Aunt Jemima, and she appeared at grocery stores, festivals, fairs, any type of food gathering, food shows, even flea markets, from what I understand, as Aunt Jemima. And she ended up becoming so popular that they used to get billboards when she was coming to town. And they would proclaim, and they had a caption that said, "I's in town, honey," which certainly wouldn't play well these days. She was, again, famous, and they signed her to a lifetime contract. But she was, which shows you how valid those are, because she was actually terminated from that in 1900 because she refused to travel to Paris to perform for a performance, and so she was terminated. She ended up living the rest of her life out relative anonymity. I think the people that she ended up working, again, in the same kind of background she had before, the people she worked with really didn't know that she was that famous. But she was an advocate for poverty or against poverty, and also for civil rights in Chicago. And she ended up dying tragically. It was pretty terrible, actually. She was a pedestrian and was hit by a car in the streets of Chicago, and just terrible accident, and it ended her life. So that's the story of the original Aunt Jemima. Going on to March 5th, a man named Harold Hawkins was born, but you'll know him as Hawkshaw Hawkins, if you do remember, who passed away on this date. He was part of that horrific plane crash that took the lives of Patsy Cline, Cowboy Copas, and of course Hawkshaw Hawkins, and that happened in 1961, I would believe, or 1963. 1963 on March the 5th. And of course, most people remember Patsy Cline, of course. She's still legendary even today. But Hawkshaw Hawkins was on that plane. He was originally from Huntington, West Virginia, and he'd had a long career entertaining. He'd be on the Grand Ole Opry and that kind of stuff. And so he was very well known in the country music scene. And he passed away at I guess I may have mentioned that, but he's age of 41 on that plane. He got the name Hawkshaw from being a little boy. He found some missing fishing poles, and somebody named him that. There was an old comic strip at the time called Hawkshaw the Detective. So, of course, with the last name Hawkins, he got stuck with the nickname Hawkshaw Hawkins, which is pretty cool. He's also known to be super tall. He was 6'5", which is a huge man now, but back then that was freakishly big. And he got the nickname of 11 yards of personality, because apparently he had a pretty outgoing fella. Had some songs called Doghouse Boogie, and he was most well known for a song called The Sunny Side of the Mountain, which was his signature song. He also, the biggest hit he had was a song called Lonesome 77203, and that was posthumously released and ended up being his only #1 hit. It happened after he passed away, and I think it was #1 on the charts for 4 weeks. He left behind a wife, Jean Shepherd, and they had a son and a daughter at the time, both young, and then she was pregnant with what would be his second son, who was born about a month after Hawkshaw Hawkins passed away, unfortunately. Very sad story, very sad ending to that life. Now on to March 6th. A lady by the name of Opal Jean Ambergy was born in 1925. She was born in Neon, Kentucky, which is now part of Fleming Neon. Or was it Neon Fleming? I think it's Fleming Neon. It is Fleming Neon. Moving right along. Letcher County. God, I've been there so many times. My brain's not working. I think my glasses are off and it makes my brain not work well. But she was a singer-songwriter, and she was originally, of course, on Opal Jean Amberger, but she changed her name to Jean Chappell as a performer. And she was marketed as being the next female Elvis. And she was signed by Sun Records. She actually had a song that was released as a B-side to one of Elvis's singles, and it was a song called Welcome to the Club. But she never really took off as a solo performing artist. She ended up moving into songwriting, and she became really good friends with Tammy Wynette. In fact, Tammy Wynette ended up marrying her brother for a short period before she married George Jones, interestingly enough. I thought that was a pretty cool story. She, her biggest hit again came as a songwriter. She wrote for Eddie Arnold a song called Lonely Again, and it became #1 hit. She also wrote songs that were sang by Dean Martin, Nancy Sinatra, of course, affiliated with Frank Sinatra, and Lori Morgan, daughter of George Morgan, ex-wife of Keith Whitley. But Jean Chapel / Opal, Jean Ambergy passed away in 1995. And finally, March 7th, 1867, the Great Flood of Chattanooga happened. And it was started on March the 7th and ended up lasting for 4 days, and it went through the 11th. And the Tennessee River crested 58 feet above its normal levels. So you can imagine the massive damage that it did. The flood death toll is not officially known, but it was said, one witness reported in just one section, counting 15 bodies floating in the river. So just a horrific accident, and still the biggest flood to ever happen in Chattanooga, still remembered 150 some years later. So 2 weeks in a row, I've ended on a bad note. I gotta find it like an end with a joke or something one of these days. I'm gonna be prepared for this. I can't leave us like this. Better luck next week, Shane. Oh well. Maybe I'll find my glasses and contacts and everything else. Thanks for watching. And if you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing, sharing it with other folks who might be interested in hearing this kind of information. I really like this. I do. I don't care if 3 people watch it. I'm glad to learn this stuff. It's like, I really enjoyed this, and it's the more I do it, the more I like knowing, and the more I realize too how little I did know beforehand, and I thought I knew a lot. Obviously, overrated myself. See you next week.